We're almost at the end of the 5th week of Russian operations in Ukraine, and there have been several major developments. Russia has announced that it will now shift from its operations in Mariupol. They have encircled, contained, and eliminated virtually every militant in that city. And these were mostly Azov, Nazi militants that were in that city. And now they are redirecting their attention to the Donbas area. There are thousands, tens of thousands of Ukrainian forces along the line of contact with Donetsk and Luhansk in eastern Ukraine. And these are the forces that have been waging a war against eastern Ukraine for the last 8 years. They've killed over 14,000 people, counting both sides. And that includes over 3,000 civilians. And this is one of the reasons Russia intervened. They did not start a war with Ukraine. They intervened in the middle of an ongoing war where the regime in Kyiv was killing ethnic Russians right on Russia's doorstep, basically. So they're focusing on that. That is the official announcement from the Russian government. They said that they're going to scale back operations around Kyiv and several other cities to focus on the east of Ukraine. And the Western media saying, well, there you go, Russia failed. They came in, they wanted to take over the entire country, and they failed. I just want to remind people of what the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, said as this operation began at the end of February. And he said it very clearly in a speech that you could find the transcript of virtually anywhere, translated into English. The purpose of this operation is to protect the people who, for 8 years now, have been facing humiliation and genocide perpetrated by the Kyiv regime. To this end, we will seek to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine, as well as bring to trial those who perpetrated numerous bloody crimes against civilians, including against citizens of the Russian Federation. It is not our plan to occupy the Ukrainian territory. We do not intend to impose anything on anyone by force. So nowhere in President Vladimir Putin's speech announcing this operation did he say he was going in to conquer all of Ukraine. So this is the West trying to depict events on the ground, playing out exactly as the president of Russia said they would, depicting this somehow as a defeat for Russia, which is amazing. And they're acting as if Russia failed and they're going to leave these cities. I have not seen them leave the cities. I've seen them scale back the amount of troops there because frankly, they don't need them there anymore. Each one of these cities have been pounded by Russian precision-guided munitions, destroying military infrastructure in each one of them, locking those forces into place. Russian forces are now fortified near Kyiv. They don't need as many forces there since they are now fortified. There's always an advantage to the defender. And so Russia now has the advantage outside of Kyiv. Now, of course, if they want to storm the city, if they want to encircle and storm the city, there are many things that need to be done that hadn't been done in the lead up to this 5th week, which tells you that they're not interested in taking Kyiv, not now. I want to remind people that Russia from 2015 onward did virtually the same thing. They were the air power, the naval power. They also had specialized ground forces on the ground, working with the Syrian Arab Army, Iranian, and Lebanese militias. They consisted the bulk of the ground forces. They created lines of contact with the enemy all across the country, and then they took specialized forces and they went from one city to the next, liberating them. That's what they did. And they didn't do it all in 1 year. It took a couple of years. It took several months for each city, and they would do one at a time. They were not going to take back all of that territory all at once. That's not how military operations work. And that is not how the military operation in Ukraine will work. So I just want to make that clear. They're going to pivot to the Donbas region. They're going to eliminate the forces, Ukrainian forces, tens of thousands of Ukrainian forces on the line of contact with Donetsk and Luhansk. And then when they're done with that, they're going to pivot. They're going to take all of those forces, and then they're going to focus them on whichever city they feel will be next. And that is determined by the facts on the ground. In Syria, they did not have a list of cities and dates on how they were going to do it. They just looked at that time, facts on the ground, which city should we do this month, this quarter of the year, which one? And then they would go and they would do that. Which one logistically, tactically, strategically makes the most sense to do? And they would do that. And there are certain cities that you have to take first in order to get to the next city. There's a logical way these have to play out. To imagine that Russia thought they were going to take over all of Ukraine in 2 or 3 days is ridiculous. They staged an immense amount of men, machinery, and munitions along the border with Ukraine to last many, many months of intense operations. And they have not even begun replenishing that yet, which they could if they need to. But they haven't even begun doing that. And that's according to the Pentagon. That's not according to Russia itself. So keep all of that in mind. That's where we are in the overview. Now, there's a couple of incidents that have taken place that I want to point out. Now, Russia all along has said Ukrainian forces are hiding amongst the civilian population. They're making it very difficult to fight them without creating an extensive amount of collateral damage. And the Western media all along has deliberately portrayed Russia as just being brutal for no apparent reason against the civilian population of Ukraine. And they never really showed any evidence of this. They would just say, oh, look, they hit this school. And they would never say that, well, these schools are being used as bases by Ukraine's military. Well, now finally, someone in the Western media has admitted it. Russia has killed civilians in Ukraine. Kyiv's defense tactics add to the danger. This is from the Washington Post. And despite this headline, what the article actually tells you is that Ukraine is putting their military forces in and amongst the civilian population on purpose so that when fighting begins, civilians will die. And so it's not Russia killing civilians, it's Ukraine killing civilians. And they almost openly and directly say that, all but openly and directly say that. So let's read through this article a little bit. The military's understandable impulse to defend against Russian attacks could be putting civilians in the crosshairs. Virtually every neighborhood in most cities has become militarized, some more than others, making them potential targets for Russian forces trying to take out Ukrainian defenses. And they have this expert from a university in London saying, I am very reluctant to suggest that Ukraine is responsible for civilian casualties, but to the extent that Ukraine brings the battlefield to the civilian neighborhoods, it increases the danger to civilians. And then the Washington Post talks about all of these civilian targets that are being hit, but they just said that Ukraine's military is militarizing these targets, making them legitimate targets in a war. Yes, it's a hospital, but there's no people there being treated. It has become a base for militants. So that's why it'll be attacked. They're not attacking hospitals because they want to kill civilians being treated. Why would they do that? And this is the same game that the Western media and the terrorists in Syria played for years and years. But the Washington Post also says Ukraine's strategy of placing heavy military equipment and other fortifications in civilian zones could weaken Western and Ukrainian efforts to hold Russia legally culpable for possible war crimes. And why is that? Because they're claiming Russia is striking all of these civilian targets, but they admit that they're not actually civilian targets. They have been militarized. They are schools and hospitals and maternity wards that have been transformed into military infrastructure that Russia is allowed under international law to strike. The Washington Post continues, if there is military equipment there, and the Russians are saying we are launching at this military equipment, it undermines an assertion that they are attacking intentionally civilian objects and civilians. Exactly. And this is a researcher from Human Rights Watch admitting this. The Washington Post also admits that their journalists have witnessed Ukrainian anti-tank rockets, anti-aircraft guns, and armored personnel carriers placed near apartment buildings. And then it says, the Ukrainian military has a responsibility under international law to remove their forces and equipment from civilian populated areas, and if that is not possible, to move civilians out of those areas. If they don't do that, that is a violation of the law of war, because what they are doing is they are putting civilians at risk, because all that military equipment are legitimate targets. This is exactly what Russia has been saying all along since this conflict began. And now Washington Post and these experts, Western experts, who are usually inclined to defend Ukraine regardless of what the facts are, even they are admitting this, because it is obvious that that is what Ukraine is doing. It is also obvious that when Russia opens up humanitarian corridors to get not just civilians out, but also fighters who don't want to continue fighting, to get them out of the city so that Russia can concentrate unhindered on those who are still willing to fight. It is obvious that it's those militants who are determined to hold the city that are stopping civilians from leaving so that they can use them as shields. That is what the Washington Post is saying. That is what Russia has said. So we're all on the same page now. So when you're standing with Ukraine, this is what you're standing with, a military that's hiding behind civilians. There's another story that had come out, and I talked about this in my recent live video, and others are talking about this, and that's good. It's good that we have an alternative media that's still out there raising this issue. This is from the New York Times. Here's what happened on day 33 of the war in Ukraine. So we're talking about March 28th. And it says, a video shows Russian prisoners of war in Ukraine being beaten and shot in their legs. So this is Ukraine torturing and shooting bound Russian soldiers captured as prisoners of war. Blatant war crime. Just absolutely blatant war crime. And this is the New York Times admitting this. The New York Times even admits that they themselves have verified the location of the video. And again, it's an actual video. It's not Human Rights Watch citing some activist who said something happened. It is an actual video of this, and it's indisputable what happened. And I'm not going to show the video. If you really want to find it and watch it, you can use the internet and do that. But it is absolutely atrocious what they did. And that's not the only video that has come out. There are multiple videos that have come out. And this is what Ukraine is doing. And some people will say, well, look, Brian, they're invaded, you know, they're upset. They're rightfully upset. And the way I answer that is no, they have been doing this since 2014, since these extremists took power with US backing. This is what they have been doing to Ukraine the entire time. This is what they were doing to other Ukrainians for the last 8 years. This is one of the reasons Russia intervened. And if you don't believe me and you think that that's all Russian propaganda, here's Amnesty International, 2014. So this is all the way back when it first started. Ukraine must stop ongoing abuses and war crimes by pro-Ukrainian volunteer forces. And they're talking about Aidar Battalion, not another one of these Nazi groups that are now incorporated into Ukraine's military officially. Here is Human Rights Watch letter to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, 2016. So it wasn't just in 2014, it's in 2016. Cruel and degrading treatment during unlawful detention. So this is not in the heat of the moment on the battlefield. These are people that have been captured by these Nazi military organizations, Azov, and they're torturing them. This is what these people have been doing the entire time from 2014 onward. And they're doing it now in the middle of this conflict. So it's not because Russia invaded. It's what they've been doing. This is one of the reasons Russia has intervened in Ukraine. So I just thought I would put that out there for people who want to continue saying, I stand with Ukraine. This is what you're standing with, war criminals, and not just a handful of incidents. This has been systematically done over 8 years. The military overall across the entire country is militarizing civilian areas and putting civilian lives in risk in contravention of international law. They're the bad guys. That's what you're standing with. That's what the Western media, who lied to you about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, about Viagra rape squads in Libya, about chemical weapons in Syria, now they've tricked you into supporting war criminals in Ukraine. Just a friendly public service announcement that that's what you're standing with when you say stand with Ukraine. I will be doing a much more involved update on the situation in Ukraine probably at the beginning of next week, the beginning of April, and we'll just see where things go from here. And until then, thank you for watching. Please like and share the video. Think about subscribing. Please check the video description for all of the links that I just went over and read for yourself what the New York Times and the Washington Post and Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch have been saying about not just this ongoing conflict now, but for the last 8 years, what these so-called patriots and nationalists have been doing in Ukraine all of this time. Also in the video description are ways you can help support my work to everyone who has been, whether it's one-time donations through Buy Me a Coffee or month-to-month through Patreon or one-time donations through PayPal. Thank you so much. And as always, thank you for watching.